The Epstein files are tearing MAGA apart. Donald Trump now says that he wants a vote on the Epstein files, too. Is this a sign that Trump is losing his grip on the GOP? And what does any of this have to do with Trump changing his mind about tariffs? Welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your libertarian review of news and culture from the editors of Reason Magazine and Friends. I am your host, Peter Suderman, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Katherine Mangu-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and special guest, Reason's very own, Eric Boehm. Okay, so last week, 20,000 emails from Epstein were made public by the House Oversight Committee. Some of them did mention Trump, but it's not clear they actually added a whole lot of new information. It's not clear they really told us anything. Trump's been trying to stop the House from having a vote to release even more files. We don't know what's in those files. But now after Trump trying for months to stop the House from having a vote, he says he wants one after all. And some reports say that a vote could come as soon as Tuesday. Katherine, let's start with you. What do you make of this? Why did Donald Trump flip?
Why does Donald Trump do anything, man? To save his own butt. He realized that things were too far gone. I do always love a last couple of remaining libertarians on the Hill and Ro Khanna collab, and this has that going for it. Thomas Massie and Khanna have joined up to basically just do a why don't you release those things already bill, which has kind of put Trump against the wall. He has, though, to be clear, only said he favors the House acting on it. He has declined to comment both about whether the Senate should do anything and also about whether he would sign it if it came to his desk,
And the reporting on the Senate is that it faces long odds in the Senate, and also, I guess he could veto it unless they get a veto-proof majority, which is something that Thomas Massie has suggested might be possible.
But I do think, yes, the answer now and always is because he thought this would be the best thing for Donald Trump in the moment.
So, Nick, this is all happening as Trump is having a breakup with everybody's favorite lawmaker from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, great at CrossFit, right? I mean, and she's gotten a lot of attention for herself, just sort of pushing back on Trump during the shutdown, on Obamacare, on all of this. So Trump unendorsed her. And Marjorie Taylor Greene says yes at length and called her wacky. I think I might agree with Trump on
Fact
this
check
one.
true.
But he unendorsed her, called her wacky, and Greene says this is about the Epstein files. She's now getting threats, bomb threats, she says, at her house. People are calling in fake pizzas, which is, on the one hand, it's a little scary. People know your address. On the other hand, free pizza? But what do you make of...
I don't know if you get to keep the pizza when it's not real.
But nowadays, it used to be that you would call in fake pizza, and then the pizza guy would be like, pay me. And that was part of the awkwardness of the situation. But you got to prepay for your pizza now, so it really is free pizza, I think.
Yeah,
that's
the tip
interesting.
goes through your card.
Yeah.
But look, this Marjorie Taylor Greene was an essential, integral, high-profile part of the Trump coalition. And it seems like the Trump coalition, MAGA, as we know it, is breaking apart right now over the Epstein files. Trump is flipping here. Again, we don't know why. But at least one reason, this is just he wants to be out ahead of this because the vote was going to happen no matter what. And he doesn't want to be seen as sort of breaking with his people here. But what do you make of this in terms of the MAGA coalition dynamics and Trump's power in Washington, which up until now has seemed pretty ironclad?
Yeah, he's a lame duck president, and we will only in retrospect be able to pinpoint the exact day that he became a lame duck president. I think there's a strong, there's strong evidence that Election Day this year was the beginning of that period, because not only did Mamdani win and ultimately Katie Wilson in Seattle, two Democratic socialists, but centrist Democrats won in states that he was pushing hard on, New Jersey and Virginia, and he's faced a bunch of setbacks elsewhere. He is also in his attack on Marjorie Taylor Greene, which I highly recommend people read. It is the most unreadable copy I've seen since Bob Dylan's liner notes on a Peter, Paul and Mary album, or the prose poem detective story Peter Gabriel wrote for Genesis as The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I mean, it repels the eyeballs from following it fully. But the main thing there
is... It's like any page of Ulysses.
He is pissed that MTG is just waving away all the great things he did to make America affordable again. And this is the biggest problem, is that Trump is losing, like he understands innately or inchoately that he's losing political battles, but he's also losing the war on reality. And if you read through that Truth Social post about Marjorie Taylor Greene, he starts taking credit for basically everything short of chocolate tasting really good when mixed with peanut butter. So that's what this is about. If we're talking about the Epstein files, then we're not talking about how kind of mediocre to shitty the economy feels to most people, with some reality behind that. So I think that's the biggest thing here. And it's a sign that he is a lame duck, and that the MAGA coalition is still around, but they're looking past him because they've got to get reelected next year in national elections. And then they got to figure out which idiot is going to carry the banner of MAGA and MAHA and all that into the next presidential election.
Yeah, Eric, Trump explicitly linked in his own post this Epstein flip to affordability, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's like, I guess, sure, let's go ahead and do the vote. I'm for it now. And then he's like, all I care about is that Republicans get back on point, all caps, which is the economy, affordability, our victory on reducing inflation from the highest level historic, right? Like, all of this stuff about historic tax cuts and the economy and how everything's cheap now because he's awesome and he's done it. Like, and there was this theory during the shutdown that like Trump didn't want the government to reopen, partly to avoid this vote. Like, it all seems to be this sort of, like, I can't even figure out which thing is being used to distract from which other thing right now. But, like, talk us through how the affordability part of this is linked to the Epstein vote part of this.
I hate that question so much.
Yeah, I imagine we'll talk quite a bit more about the affordability stuff later on. So we'll talk in more detail about that later. I think you started this off, Peter, by asking if he's losing his grip over the Republican Party. I think it's clear that Trump's losing his grip over something. I'm not sure that it's just the Republican Party. But I think two big points here. First is that, yeah, Trump, look, this is what he always does, right? He just throws stuff at the wall and sees what works and then goes with it, goes for the applause line. That's always kind of been his theory of politics. And I think that's the case here, too. Like trying to yell at Thomas Massie and be like, don't you dare hold this vote, was clearly not working. So he's trying a different tactic now. And, like, yeah, this makes some degree of sense. Like, oh, make it look like Congress is concerned about this frivolous, silly thing while I'm concerned about the serious thing that Americans are talking about. Like, okay, like, I get that, like, some political person sat down with Trump, some strategist sat down and said, like, here's the way you manage your way through this. And then he Trumpified it in his brain, and this is what came out on social media. I think the bigger problem, and the thing I keep thinking about with the Epstein thing, is that, like, for anybody who hopes to accomplish anything in the public policy arena, which is all of us and most of the people that we know in and around Washington, D.C., the problem is that the federal government is run by morons, and that's not going to get better anytime soon, right? Like, it's not just Trump. This is a shot at Trump, but it's not just a shot at Trump, because he may be like the grand poobah of the moron parade, right? But there's a long line of morons behind him, red morons and blue morons and, like, RFK Jr. morons who don't really know what color they are. And for anybody who wants to accomplish anything serious and substantial as a policy matter, you've got to look at other ways to do this. You've got to look at states and cities and those lower down political systems, because this is what Congress is making a big stink about. And look, I want the moron. I mean, I want the Epstein files to come out. I think they should come out for transparency's sake, and they make a lot of powerful people squirm, and I like it when powerful people squirm. But it's also like, I want Congress to have big fights with the president over, like, his tariff powers and his war powers and how much we're spending. And this is the thing that Congress is having the big fight with Trump on. So I don't know. It bothers me that you've got, Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, leading the charge on this. And this is the line that Congress is going to draw. This is the fight they're going to pick. I don't know. I don't like it for, a whole bunch of, like, big picture reasons.
Well, Nick, let's go back to you.
She knows affordability, though, and that's what
sure.
She was stressing the shutdown, and the Obamacare subsidies. She named that a lot. She ran a construction business, or runs a construction business in Georgia, and I think she is speaking from hearing from her constituents, which is that affordability is the issue and things like that. So. That is basically the problem that Trump has to face. He's talking about how he got rid of inflation, but he really hasn't. It's about 3%. The Yale Budget Lab, which tracks this stuff, says, that Trump's tariffs have, created a massive, we're at historic highs, almost double from where we were before he implemented them. It's likely to be a drag on GDP, economic growth, job creation, and things like that. And I think you hear from somebody like MTG who, she's more in touch with the, the hoi polloi than Donald Trump is.
I mean, Eric, there's a big report in Axios this morning about how Ted Cruz is trying to get out front for the 2028 race, right? Rand Paul is doing the Rand Paul thing, talking about how Trump, and Rand Paul is, to be clear, totally correct on this, talking about how Trump is, striking boats without authorization. He's killed 80 people so far, moved an aircraft carrier group towards Venezuela, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but you've got all these breaks now where people see that the king is not gone, but he's a lame duck. The King Trump is not going to be as powerful as he has been. And so people are vying to be the next one within the Republican Party.
I think what you're saying is that like this vote, if and when it happens and assuming it passes, is the first blow, right? The first actual leak in the hull or something like that of Trump's presence over the GOP. And I hope that's right. Like, I hope that is the beginning of the dam breaking. That's probably the better metaphor here. And that we will then see Congress assert its proper role on a whole bunch of these other issues like you just laid out there, Peter and Nick. I don't know that that's true. I don't know that I believe that yet, but I am with you in spirit. I hope that's where we're headed.
It's also true, like the tweet that you started reading earlier, Pierre, the Truth Social that you started reading earlier, Peter,
the Zeet, the X post,
the rest of Trump's laundry list of the important issues that he wanted to get back to, you elided over, but I want to read them because I do think that's the other part of this. So like, you can go back and forth about how important the Epstein emails are. I am not particularly driven by that issue. But then he says we have to get back to, as you referenced, the inflation thing, delivering historic tax cuts, gaining trillions of dollars of investment into America, a record, the rebuilding of our military, securing our border, deporting criminal legal aliens, ending men in women's sports, stopping transgender for everyone, and so much more. So like 2 of the 8 agenda items are something trans. And, I think we should always remember when we say like, it would really be great if we could just like leave aside this frivolous thing and return to doing public policy debate about these important things. Like, we're just going to return to doing public policy debate about trans issues.
Yes.
And
it's just going to be morons doing more stupid things.
That is,
unfortunately.
I just think always worth keeping in mind. Trump has plenty more in his arsenal of stuff to sort of rabbit off after if he wants to keep us distracted.
Well, since you bring that up, Trump certainly does, and he has had success sort of with this combination of economic issues on the one hand, but also, culture war issues on the other. That has kind of been, he's kind of flipped back and forth between them. And Marjorie Taylor Greene has been part of that as his ally. But one of the things that went around this weekend was there was a moment when she was on cable news. She's just been on cable news a whole lot recently, where she just said, I don't have the quote exactly in front of me, but it's humbly, I'm sorry for taking part in toxic politics. And so I wonder if you think that this turning point, or dam breaking, whatever it is, might actually lead us to a post-Trump moment in which the culture war, in which the sort of the stupidity problem, in which the dipshit problem on the right is not maybe quite as bad as it has been under Trump for the past 10 years.
No.
And I wish.
You're not? No? This is the apology didn't
I think
didn't
you
mean
speak for
something?
all of us,
I mean, I get why we would
Yeah.
long for that. I too long for that. But I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene saying 3 sensible sentences in a row on cable news is the turning point that our nation has been yearning for.
Yeah, I don't think we get post-Trump until Trump's actually out of office. And even then, I think, we'll see how things shake out. But if Ted Cruz, who, is an idiot,
Ted
like
Cruz,
if he
your only
emerges
hope.
as,
He's got a
and
great beard.
J.D. Vance is not going anywhere. Pete Hegseth is an idiot, and he's not going anywhere. I mean, I think Rand Paul is On the Republican side, Rand Paul is the adult in the room. He's somebody who showed, or at least ran for president in the past. He's going to be much more seasoned. I find him much more interesting and aligned with how I think government should function and what its priorities should be. But you also have a ton of people on the left who are, who are problematic in their own and are terrible and are toxic. We have to understand Trump is not the cause of anything as much as he is the effect of it. And we will, we're not out of a toxic politics dynamic. We're certainly not post-Trump, and it's gonna require something different. We need to elect different people if we want different political dynamics.
And it's going to require the leadership of the two major parties, or at least one of them, to just be more serious with the American people in some election cycle, right? And not run as they did in this past election. The Republicans, I live in Virginia, and I had to watch all these ads week after week for the woman who was running for governor there, Winsome Sears, about how this Abigail Spanberger wanted to mutilate babies and trans every fifth grader or something like that, and it's just like completely unserious, and that's what they think was going to help them win. Obviously they did a lot of polling, I'm sure, or testing of some sort to figure out what the best ad was, and that's where so much of this landed. And until we move on from that, you won't get better politics, because you're going to be electing people who you're going to be courting voters and then electing candidates who think that's the most important issue facing the country, when it's plainly not.
I have this sad little desire to ask everybody to say something nice.
We did a lot about Amina in that session.
It's so bad. We're so
nice about
grumpy.
what?
I don't know.
The weather is beautiful in New
politics,
York City, which is about to, institute Sharia law.
I hesitated to even raise it
the
because
weather can
I was
always be nice.
I don't know what I would say on that prompting, but it's yes, this is all garbage. Yes, our politics are really pretty bleak, but also, I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's the weather's nice. It's going to be okay. I don't.
No, but even in politics, I mean, I think Trump losing control of the Republican Party is fundamentally good, not just for the Republicans who are not doing particularly well, but for Americans in general. And also, I'm not a fan of either Spanberger or the woman who won in New Jersey. I mean, they're just they're the worst kind of moderate centrists. They stand for nothing except vaguely a warfare state that's not as stupid as Pete Hegseth, really. But we're coming out of an era where Donald Trump was in control of the Republican Party and Joe Biden was in charge of the Democratic Party, and I mean he really was Weekend at Bernie's. It's. I think it might be autumn in North America, but I think it's spring for better politics.
Yeah, the crack up of the Republican Party can only be good, I think. Yeah.
I think it's time for a turning point of our own in this podcast, but also an answer to Katherine's question, some good news. Donald Trump is reversing course on a bunch of his tariffs, especially where food is concerned. We've got beef, coffee, bananas, right? A healthy breakfast there, right? More than 200 products, mostly from Latin American countries, all right? But and the Trump advisors just going around saying, this is what we're going to do to lower prices. We're gonna cut tariffs. Eric, is this the funniest thing that has happened in politics this year? I mean, they're just
it's pretty funny. Yeah.
We spent 6 months on this podcast saying that tariffs were going to make things more expensive, and all the Trump people were like, "No, you don't understand. 27-dimensional chess. That's not how tariffs work. We're going to get the money and we're going to spend. It's going to make everybody
grow
rich."
Bananas
but now
here.
he's yeah. We got an affordability problem, and the way that we solve or start to solve the affordability problem is by ending some of the tariffs.
Yeah.
Good news, right?
I welcome the White House acknowledging economic reality. I am thrilled about this. I mean, I would be more thrilled about it if it was a broader rollback, because honestly, I think nobody's going to get what they want here, right? I think eliminating tariffs on coffee and beef sure, obviously that's great. They were stupid. It's a stupid policy. We should applaud the reversal of a stupid policy. But that's not going to like meaningfully bring down grocery prices because it's only a couple of items anyway. And it's only imports from a couple of countries. We only get something like 4% of our coffee from these 4 countries that they rolled back the tariffs from, or 7%, sorry, of our coffee imports. So it's not like it's even going to meaningfully make a huge dent, I don't think, in the affordability problem. So the White House isn't really going to get what they want here either, because they've still got, we've still raised tariffs to a level not seen in 100 years. And these couple little step backs and retreats, again, totally welcome them, but like it's not a victory for the anti-tariff side, and it certainly isn't going to produce, I don't think, the sort of results that the White House is looking for here either on the affordability side. So I hope we see more of it. As I said in the piece I wrote last week about this, like somebody at the White House should ponder, if we can lower prices on coffee and bananas by getting rid of tariffs, what about the manufacturing sector, which gets 51% of all imports into this country, our raw materials and intermediate goods that go into making other things? The manufacturing sector seems like it's in a recession right now. What could we do to help that? I don't know.
I don't know, Eric. It's a mystery. It's too hard.
I'm glad for small steps, small victories.
Katherine, this is the answer to your question. It's not the best news. It's not everything is fixed. It's not even most things are fixed. But it's a small movement in the right direction, which is to acknowledge that, markets are real, that economics actually has insights that are correct about this stuff, that tariffs raise prices on Americans. And you have just seen for the past several days now, Trump economic policy advisors going on television and basically being forced to admit this after spending 10 months just saying, oh, we're going to raise tariffs and it's going to be great for the American consumer. This is good news. Maybe they'll learn a lesson. Maybe.
I don't trust it because I am a rational person who can see recent history. And so the thing is, Trump keeps changing his mind on tariffs, you guys. I feel like there's someone on this podcast who's covered that pretty extensively. And I think that the words that some people in the Trump administration are saying right now about the connection between prices and tariffs happen to be correct, but I don't trust them to say or believe those words a month from now. So I guess the kind of good news that I would be looking for would be good news that will continue to be good for more than the next couple of weeks. However, I also want to add a very important piece of information that will help us all in our thinking about political history, and that is, we were joking earlier about steak for breakfast. For some reason this weekend, I stumbled upon President Taft's daily diet, just a list of all the food. And one thing that this man did was eat a 12-ounce steak for breakfast every single morning, just as a side dish to the rest of his breakfast, which also included 5 cups of coffee.
Bro was protein maxing
cream and sugar
before protein maxing was a thing.
This man did not eat a blueberry yogurt parfait. I am telling you, there was a lot more going on.
His breakfast menu, which I've seen floating around the internet, is like Winston Churchill's liquor prescription during Prohibition. It's,
extensive.
And like my diet now on both counts.
To follow up on what Katherine was saying, though, Trump, since Liberation Day, has done at least 5 major, kind of adjustments to his tariff policies, typically pulling them back or making carve-outs and things like that. It would be great if he or the people around him would say, hey, you know what? We didn't realize we were reading this wrong. It's actually tariffs are bad, not tariffs are good. Unfortunately, none of the people around Trump are going to do that, and none of his, enablers in the press or in the policy world are going to do that, because the idea of controlling things through trade policy and industrial policy is central to their idea of a governed economy, that the president in particular is in charge of.
Yeah,
so that is deeply worrying.
No, real quick on that point. I mean, Katherine mentioned about the, what business owners are dealing with right now. I've talked to dozens of them over the course of the trade war. And this is the thing that comes up over and over again is it's like, well, the cost of the tariffs is one thing, but it's really that we just don't know what things are going to cost next week or next month. You know, if you put something on a boat somewhere and it's going to take 6 weeks to get here, you have no idea what the policy is going to be when it comes in. And that's kind of been the bigger problem, or it seems like to many of the people I've spoken to at least have said that's a bigger problem. Nick mentioned earlier about the size of the tax increase here too, right? Like the Yale Budget Lab says this is between an $1,800 and $2,400 annual tax, depending on how you do the math and whether you include dynamic effects and things like that. But that's, you know, $2,000 out of the average American household's budget. To what I said earlier about, you know, okay, rolling back tariffs on coffee and bananas is great, but you're not going to save people $2,000. Like, you just raised their taxes by $2,000, and now you're giving them like a $10 rebate for their next coffee purchase. That doesn't work out. That doesn't create the affordability. But there is this other idea. Yeah.
There is this other idea that Trump is floating, which is the $2,000 tariff dividend, right? So aren't people going to get that $2,000 back in the form of I guess what amounts to a stimulus check?
It's such a spectacular demonstration of like total mistrust in markets to allocate goods and resources. Like, okay, we're gonna tax it out, we're gonna rearrange the economy according to our whims, and then we're gonna hand it back to you so that you can pay the increased prices on all the things that we increased the prices on. What in God's name? This is not a good system.
Oh, it's the most shameless kind of vote buying, and it's worth remembering that George W. Bush did that at the beginning of the calendar year 2008, before the financial crisis hit. And I guess it was John McCain took a real brutal beat up in the presidential election that year.
And it's all,
so speaking of vote buying, this isn't a vote exactly that's being bought, but Trump has pulled back on some of the Swiss tariffs after they gave him a gold bar and a Rolex, right? This is, I mean, that doesn't seem like the system that we want to have for making policy. On the one hand, it's good, right?
Yeah. Now they should have also given a cuckoo clock and a lifetime supply of Ricola or something.
But it wasn't just Switzerland. I point out it was also Liechtenstein, which U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer put out a statement this weekend saying, Liechtenstein, saying that we have Trump's tremendous negotiating powers. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's in the piece that I wrote today. You can go find the quote there. Tremendous negotiating powers have scored this victory for the United States against these two other economies. And it's like, oh, man.
Sworn enemies.
Yes. All the blue-collar workers are now free from the oppression of the Liechtensteiners. I'm so glad that's what's happening. I mean, this is the kind of conclusion that I come to in the piece that I wrote today, which is that there's two ways to look at this. Either whatever economic emergency underpinned these tariffs and required us to have 39% tariffs on chocolate and watches from Switzerland, either that economic emergency, those conditions have suddenly changed overnight, which I don't know. What happened to change those conditions? Or the emergency never existed in the first place, in which case Trump made up an emergency to seemingly enrich himself and mess with the economy a whole bunch. And then now he's just like, oh, okay, I got some gold bars from Switzerland, so emergency over. This is why this is exactly why, I mean, this won't come up, I don't think, in the Supreme Court's analysis on these things, but this is exactly why the Supreme Court or Congress needs to step in and draw clear lines on where the president's tariff powers lie, because you can't just say the words national emergency and then do whatever you want. That cannot be the way the system works.
Seems like it is.
But it is the way the system works, but it cannot be that way.
I hope you're, I had forgotten about the fact that this is all right in front of the Supreme Court. And most analysts are saying it's clear that Trump is going to lose, but there's an outside case that he doesn't, that the tariffs are not immediately struck down by the Supreme Court, which would be disastrous because it sounds like the Trump administration is getting the message, even if they're never going to admit it.
Katherine, Scott Bessent, Trump economic advisor, is defending Trump's tariff policies, saying the court shouldn't do this on television this weekend. What he said was, well, it's historically the court doesn't go after the president's signature economic policy. It's not quite a quote, but that's pretty close. It was that it's a signature policy, as if, I mean, I'm not the first person to come up with this, but there's not a signature policy clause in the Constitution, right? There's not a.
It's like you don't get a pass from the court if you really, really want it.
Please.
If you promise, I promised, Mom, I promised already that.
We put together a list of your 10 policies, but then the top one, that's your signature policy.
You get one freebie.
The reasoning of this is the same as Mom, I know you said no sleepovers, but I already promised Sarah that she could stay over tonight. It's like, no.
It sounds like maybe
no.
you're the Supreme Court
that example
of
was just a
sleepovers.
hypothetical that has nothing to do with my life. Anyway, the other thing that our Treasury Secretary said on TV this weekend was that the reason that beef is expensive is because the migrants are bringing their cattle with them and maybe reintroducing disease, or maybe just like there are extra cows around and they're bad cows. There's literally no evidence for any of that. We need to get our morning steak somehow. I understand us and President Taft. But, if we can't get our morning steak, we can have just our turtle soup and possum with dinner, and it's going to be okay. We're going to get our protein. So this is, again, not a matter for the federal government.
Wait, I've also got an example of Scott Bessent.
Some kind of an explanation.
Let's have it.
Can we have everybody go around and talk about Scott Bessent's favorite clownish moment on TV? He said, this was about a week ago now, but he said in reference to those $2,000 stimulus checks that they might not be actual checks. They might come in the form of the tax breaks that have already been delivered via like the big beautiful bill, which has trade Twitter's had a lot of fun with that, imagining that like Scott Bessent will tell you, well, you're not, it's a $2,000 stimulus check, but it's coming to you in the form of your child's love, or it's coming to you in the form of a warm puppy.
The real $2,000 tax break is the friends we made along the way.
Yeah.
So. I also, just to dump a little bit more on Bessent, to say that you can't have, the president's signature policy proposal can't be challenged by the Supreme Court. Did he forget about Obamacare? Or
probably
virtually every element of the New Deal and things like that. Of course, they can be challenged. In fact, most of the time they need to be, because certainly in the case of the New Deal and Obamacare, they were unconstitutional. And to the extent that Obamacare, slipped that noose, it's really a bad thing, because we are dealing with shittier healthcare as a result, worse healthcare markets because of Obamacare. So I'll leave it at that.
I think he actually was thinking of Obamacare as when he was making this case. I think he was thinking of the moment when the Supreme Court said, in fact, Obamacare is fundamentally constitutional. The individual mandate is constitutional. If you view it as a tax, yes, Medicaid is not going to be mandatory for states to expand. And so that's the one thing, that the part of it that we're going to accept. But Obamacare, when it went to the Supreme Court, the court really worked hard to find a way to justify the individual mandate and say that, yes, it could be constitutional if you view it as a tax. And so I think the court was wrong in that case. But there's also an important difference that Scott Bessent didn't talk about, which is that was a law that was passed by Congress, that was clearly passed through the constitutional mechanism in Congress. It wasn't just that Obama kind of waved his hand and did a thing. And that is what Trump is doing all over right now with tariffs, with the going after the drug boats, with moving the aircraft carrier, with all of this stuff. This is just Trump playing king. This is just Trump deciding to do stuff entirely, it's his whim, and that's all that matters. And so there is a big difference in the court saying, well, we're gonna be a little more deferential to a law that is passed by Congress and then signed by the president through that process, than the court saying, we're going to be deferential to the president claiming an executive power that he has basically made up out of thin air for emergencies that don't really exist, because if they existed, or that existed right up until he got the gold bars that made the emergency end. So anyway, that's we're going to go to a break now. When we come back, we're going to answer a question about healthcare. You guys have a lot of questions about healthcare. We talked about it last week, and man, got so many emails. We are going to answer one of them this week. The Reason Roundtable is sponsored by Crowd Health. So around this time every year, open enrollment season rolls around for health insurance. Health insurance companies hope you'll just renew your policy without looking at the price or the fine print, which can be pretty confusing. Crowd Health is the alternative funding mechanism for people who want to make their own choices. Crowd Health is a community of people funding each other's medical bills directly. There's no middleman, no networks, no nonsense. So here at Reason, I write a lot about health insurance, and I'll tell you, even I know it can be confusing. It can be frustrating, a pain in the you-know-what. Crowd Health is an alternative to health insurance. You can join for $100 or less with access to low-cost prescriptions, lab testing tools, a database of quality doctors who've been vetted by Crowd Health, Something major happens, you pay the first $500, and then CrowdHealth steps in to help out with funding the rest. This is not Obamacare with all its frustrations and high prices. It's a different way of thinking about funding your medical expenses. CrowdHealth members have saved over $40 million in healthcare expenses because they refuse to overpay for healthcare. This open enrollment season, take your power back. Join CrowdHealth to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months using code REASON at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com. Code REASON. CrowdHealth is not insurance. Opt out. Take your power back. This is how we win. The Reason Roundtable is sponsored by BetterHelp. So the days are getting shorter and they're getting darker, but that doesn't mean they have to be emotionally trying. This November, BetterHelp is encouraging everyone to reach out, to check in with friends, reconnect with loved ones, remind the people in your life that you're there. Call your mom, text a best friend, have coffee with an acquaintance that you just want to get to know a little bit better. Yes, sometimes this can be a little bit difficult. And just as it can take a little bit of courage to send that message or grab coffee with someone you haven't seen in a while, reaching out for therapy can feel a little bit trying too. But I promise it's worth it. And when you do, you'll wonder, why didn't I do this sooner? BetterHelp has quality therapists. They work according to a strict code of conduct. BetterHelp helps you connect with a therapist who fits your needs and your preferences. If you're not happy with your match, you can switch. Find a different therapist at any time from tailored recommendations. BetterHelp has over 30,000 therapists. It's the largest online therapy platform in the world. It serves over 5 million people globally. And it works, with an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a live session based on over 1.7 million client reviews. So this month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you are checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it easier to take that first step. Reason Roundtable listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/roundtable. That's betterhelp.com/roundtable. All right, a reminder. We have a webathon coming up, and we're going to have a special podcast where you can ask us anything at all. On that podcast, it's going to be Katherine, Matt Welch, myself, and special guest, Reason's very own Dungeon Master and free media star, Robbie Suave. You can ask us about policy, about politics, about science fiction, about Dungeons and Dragons, what it's like to work at Reason, but I repeat myself. You ask, we're going to answer. To ask us a webathon question. Send your short, succinct, pithy, and otherwise not very long actual question to podcast@reason.com. And remember to put the word webathon in the subject line. If I don't see the word webathon in the subject line, I might just miss it. You can also send us questions for the regular show, too. We like to answer one every week. This week's comes from Lloyd, who writes, the fixes for healthcare that Congress will likely propose are probably going to have very little effect. My question is, what, in your opinion, has to happen to incentivize them to throw out the government-run insurance system and return control and negotiation about healthcare costs to doctors, patients, and private insurance companies? Katherine, let's start with you. How do we have a revolution in healthcare policy?
Well, the actual question was, how could we get Congress to even remotely consider being serious about this, right? And I think that's a different question than like, well, what is the best policy, or like, what does that look like? Okay, I think we've talked about that some. We'll talk about that more. But I actually think Lloyd's question is the right question. None of our policy proposals matter if there are no congressmen who will seriously entertain them, who will introduce them, who will champion them on the floor. And I think that I think it's hopeless. But if I'm trying to answer the question,
Katherine.
But if I'm trying to answer the question,
you're the one who's like, please, good news. Give us some good news.
That's what I'm asking, because I can't furnish it for myself. Okay, so if I'm trying to seriously answer the question, though, I do think that it may be a case where it has to get bad enough before it gets better. And I am very, very allergic to those conditions. But I do think at some point people's insurance premiums collectively just get so high that the American public will truly make an election about fixing healthcare in a meaningful way. I think that is possible. I think we could get essentially a single issue election in the coming decade if every single person in America is just paying $1 bazillion and getting coverage that they don't like. And it's open enrollment season. So maybe people are feeling that more right at this moment, which is why they're sending us emails.
Eric, not that long ago, Donald Trump said, we're not going to extend and expand the expanded Obamacare subsidies that have been at the heart of this shutdown that just ended. What he said, though, was we want to send that money back to people. We want to fund people, not programs. Senator Cassidy, who's one of the sort of better Republican healthcare minds, maybe low bar, but actually knows what he's talking about, I think more than a lot of other folks do, said on television this weekend, the president is proposing we take $26 billion that would be going to insurance companies if we just do an extension and give it directly to the American people, in which 100% of the money is used for them to purchase health care on their own terms. That makes them an informed consumer. So should we just take that $26 billion and give it to people?
Yeah, probably. We should probably do a lot more than that. But this is not a terrible idea. I think the Republican Party has really struggled. Let me just back up for a second here and say that what happened with Obamacare is that you had a decades long, right, many election cycles in which Democrats were putting forth various iterations of, but more or less all kind of circling around the same kind of set of reforms. And then you had obviously a lot more changes happened when it got into Congress, but you had a constituency there for it. And the Republican Party has had for a long time a anti-Obamacare message that culminated in the near repeal of it during the first Trump administration. But there really hasn't been they haven't gone past the concepts of a plan stage, right? Which is the line that we keep throwing around funny because it's funny. But this is actually the concept of a plan that makes some sense, right? The original sin of the American healthcare system is that wacky little tax carve out that was created during World War II, where your employer gives you money that goes straight to your health insurance company, but because that money isn't taxed and you never actually possess it, but it passes through effectively through your bank account and then goes to buy health insurance, but really that's just a backdoor. And then we built on top of that this federal system that just delivers subsidies even more directly to the health insurance companies without giving people any sort of say in how that money is spent, and unwinding all of that and letting people have those dollars, whether those dollars come from the federal government or from their employer or some combination of the two, and then choosing what to do with those dollars, maybe within a set of constrained choices that we set up because we want you to buy health products with it or something, right, will help to inject some semblance of competition and hopefully lower prices into the system. I don't know that that solves everything, but I do think that is a pretty significant step in the right direction. This is a very small first half step of that significant step, but it would be something.
Nick, what about you? What do you think?
It's worth remembering that John McCain actually campaigned on getting rid of the employer tax break for healthcare benefits and things like that. And that would have been a better conversation to have had, in 2008 or in 1988 or whatever, just to get us off of this. To go back to the way I think Katherine correctly framed the reader's question too, I would look forward to an election that is based around healthcare. That's basically the only issue. I worry about the outcome of that, but that's what we're here for. I think another way that lawmakers may be incentivized to start pulling government money out of the healthcare system, because Eric, in the system you're talking about, I was thinking, God, that sounds a lot like higher education. And what it means, if you have a lot of government money sloshing around, it's better to be in a market setup, but it means prices are going to be more than they are. And it means a lot of people are going to fall by the wayside, and there's just going to be tremendous amounts of waste. But along with what Katherine was saying about insurance premiums for people who get their healthcare through work, the vast majority of Americans, if those premiums go up, but also the twin thing of people using more direct care money to buy the healthcare they want when they want it. And before, in preparation for this, I was looking at various surveys that were saying that up to 27% of people using GLPs, either for diabetes or especially for weight loss, it could be as high as 30% of people are paying for those directly out of pocket. And if there are more things that people want and they're willing to pay for, and that starts to become bigger and bigger, and I know a lot of people who do that for various things when they go to not exactly an urgent care, but a doctor who has regular hours and you can drop in and see them rather than going through their own insurance. I think as that kind of direct care portion of healthcare dollars, and it could be fueled by HSAs or whatever, as that grows, people are going to be starting to say, why am I being told that I am getting, $4,500 or $15,000 a year in healthcare benefits when I don't access them, I don't use them, and I don't want that. I think the direct care is a big thing here. And any small policy changes that can make it easier for people to just go out on the street and buy healthcare directly from people who are willing to provide it, I think that's a really great way to start destroying the system.
So the question here is basically, how do you get Congress to take productive, good action on healthcare when they have been resistant? Katherine's answer was things need to get worse before they get better. I think that's almost right, but in fact, totally wrong. I think things need to get better before they get better. And the way that what I mean by that is somebody, somewhere needs to demonstrate real results in a healthcare system so that people can point to it and say, see, that's working. This is what has happened with the abundance movement. They looked at red state housing policy and were like, hey, things are not as expensive in Texas as they are in New York and California. And you actually have some legislators who are following along, or at least talking about following along. This has created a real movement because you could point to real results. Ozempic, Wegovy, people like that because there's real results. They're willing to pay for that thing, for that drug out of pocket because they can see. You can just look on television and see at any Republican, at any Democrat political conference, any place where there are human beings who maybe, especially were not movie stars, they're like, they're all skinny now. You can just see what's happening, and the results are real. This happened in Argentina with Milei as well. Milei he wasn't himself up for re-election, but there was a big election. We covered it on this show about a month ago, and people were like, maybe Milei is not going to look good for him because people don't like all this government cutting and regulation slashing and all the stuff that he's doing. And in fact, his party overperformed because people could see the real results. Inflation was down from 200% to something like 32 or 34%. Still way too high, but there was an absolutely demonstrable, real positive result in their lives. And so what we need is not for things to get worse. We need for some pocket, somewhere, some zone of things not sucking to exist so that we can point to that and say, let's do that. That's how we are going to convince people to go along with us. And in fact, I think you see a little bit of that just with Trump rolling back the tariffs here. Yes, things did have to get worse before they got better, but there's plenty of historical evidence. There's just tons and tons of actual real-world evidence in which lifting tariffs makes things cheaper. So when things get better, even in a little tiny kind of not huge way, you can look at that and say, I want to repeat that. I want to do that again. Things are better in this one little space. Now let's make them better in a bigger space. That's how you get policy wins. That's how you're going to convince people in Congress to change their minds. Not by making things worse, but making things better. That's what we try to do here at Reason. Speaking of things getting worse, maybe getting a little bit better here. Yeah, President Trump said he might talk with Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro. At the same time, though, U.S. keeps striking these boats, right? They've killed, it's something like 20 boat strikes now, killed more than 80 people who the U.S. government says are involved in narco-terrorism. And there is now an aircraft carrier group in the region that is a pretty big, pretty significant display of force. Katherine, right? It's 80 people already dead. These strikes are unauthorized, but we're just out there with with missiles and bombs killing people, and also sending a giant, aircraft carrier force right into their waters. Aren't we kind of already at war here?
Definitely, we're already at a bunch of wars. I mean, this is, I would say, a danger that Reason has been warning about for a long time, which is that if you call something a war on something, it takes on increasingly warlike characteristics. And so this is, in some ways, all just downstream from the war on drugs, which, it was a metaphor, guys. It was just a metaphor. No, it's a literal war now, and has been for quite some time, with bombs and guns and everything. And I think, likewise, you could say the war on terror, which was, a little bit more authorized as something that looked a little more like an actual war-ish thing, or at least a use of force, depending on how you count it. it's just acting like a war now. And, this is not a novel observation, but war is the health of the state. And so the people in power don't mind doing a little war from time to time. Frankly, I think the main thing that's holding us back from calling this thing that is already a war is that Trump did, seemingly accidentally, promise he wasn't going to do new wars. And to slap the label on it would be to admit failure on that front or a broken promise for something that people genuinely did seem to want from him, to vote for him to do, especially in the second election or in the third election. It's a war. Of course it's a war. It's been a war all this time.
Eric, how does this play into the affordability discourse here? Right, because in fact,
drugs are going to get more expensive, I guess.
No, yeah, right.
Eric, do things have to get better before they get worse?
Aircraft carriers are also going to get more expensive, actually.
Yeah. No, we can't build boats because they're too freaking expensive. Is actually
we don't build any boats in this country. No, but
you see people in Trump world, MAGA types like Steve Bannon, who are saying more or less, I'm summarizing here, but who are saying Trump has focused too much on the rest of the world and not nearly enough on everyday life, in particular economics, affordability for Americans here. Do you think that there's any way that maybe that pulls Trump back from the brink? I mean, yes, we're already in this little unacknowledged war, but what we don't want is for there to be an expansion. What we don't want is for this to get worse. There's, all these rumors that maybe we're going to actually just bomb the Venezuela and take out Maduro. What we want is for the U.S. not to do that. We want Trump to just keep doing the few good things that he is doing, even if those good things are reversing his bad policies.
Yeah, I think if I was going to steel man the Trump administration's case on all the Venezuela stuff, I would say two things. And the first is that I think they're trying to make the case that they are doing a thing here that helps everyday Americans, right? The idea, and it doesn't make a lot of sense when you really think about it, but I think the idea is that hey, if we stop the flow of drugs, we'll stop, fentanyl is tied up in some of these tariff orders too, that we're going to put tariffs on legal goods and that'll somehow stop the flow of fentanyl into the country, which also doesn't make any sense to think about it. But the way they're presenting this is that if we crack down really hard on drugs, that'll make our communities better. It'll help Americans out. There'll be fewer addicts, and then downstream of that is a bunch of good stuff, and everybody's happy and productive again. That's the one argument they make. And then the other thing that I'm not totally unsympathetic to is the idea that Maduro is, he's not just a dictator and authoritarian, but he's actually an unlawful one, right? Who didn't win his last election. He's not legitimately in power. And so, do you grasp at some sort of old-timey understanding of American sphere of influence and then say, well, we got to go kick the bad guy out of power in Latin America because that's what we do. I think they're kind of in both of their sort of making arguments that revolve around those two centers of gravity. And I'm not, again, on the second one, I'm not totally unsympathetic to the idea that maybe getting Maduro out of power, if we could do it in a way that doesn't involve boots on the ground and doesn't involve actually bombing Venezuelans, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the outcome of that is one that is good for the United States and good for the people of Venezuela and good for the entire Western Hemisphere. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of these arguments on both hands, and I think the drone strike or the strikes on the boats in the Caribbean are just it's maybe not even borderline impeachable conduct. I think it might very well be impeachable conduct without congressional authorization. It's very far across the line. But I think the Trump administration is thinking about this as something that will in some way improve Americans' actual lives.
Nick, how do you think about that escalation here?
It's wrong. It's criminal. It's beyond impeachable. I think it's the type of behavior that he should be removed from office from, and won't be. There's also a precedent here. Bill Clinton actually, at a certain point, chased out Raul Cedras, who had taken charge of Haiti back in the 90s. And that I wrote about that. It was disturbing and worrisome. In the end, nothing happened. Cedras folded. I mean, the thing that Trump could do here, and it's worth pointing out, that the Venezuelan Peace Prize winner thanked Donald Trump for his support, moral and otherwise, in Venezuela. Every Venezuelan or Venezuelan adjacent libertarian I know is saying, yes, please, I hope that America bombs Venezuela. I hope they put troops in the ground. I don't agree with any of that, but it's worth recognizing there's a precedent here for a decent outcome if you look at Haiti in the 90s, and that there's a huge amount of support among Venezuelans, including libertarian Venezuelans, for this kind of action. I think it's still wrong, and it's predicated upon an absolute lie, the idea that Venezuela is somehow central to drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl into America. That is empirically wrong. Nobody believes that. Even Trump's own DEA says that Venezuela is not even responsible for cocaine, much less fentanyl coming into the country. And there needs to be a seriousness of process and procedure. Congress needs to say, we are authorizing force or we are not, and the president has to abide by that. I think, one of the real tragedies is that if Trump wanted to sell this to MAGA, he could say, if we get a stable regime that is liberal and friendly and good and decent to the people of Venezuela, it will stop the destabilization of that entire area that is actually a major reason why so many people from Latin America were coming to the United States. But he's too stupid to think that way. And I worry that diplomatically he is just incapable of doing what it would take to work with every other country in the area, maybe not Cuba, but every other no countries in Latin America are like, oh, it's really great that Venezuela is run by Nicolás Maduro. Everybody detests him. The people detest him, as Eric was saying. It was something like 70% of the people voted against him in the last presidential election in 2024. This would be a place where if Trump could actually exercise some whiff of the diplomacy that he showed, or his son-in-law showed in setting up the Abraham Accords, we would be getting somewhere where we would make the world a better place. And instead, I think we're going to see real darkness ahead.
Maybe it plays out like the Manuel Noriega situation in the 80s. We could just set up a bunch of speakers and blast rock music at Maduro until he resigns, right? Isn't that basically how that went down? I'm too young to really remember
arrest him, though. I mean, we sent troops in.
Yeah,
so,
right. That's true. There were troops on the ground, But
loudspeakers and rock music is definitely the libertarian solution here. No, it's... Nick, you pointed to Congress not taking action and saying that it should, and this is just at the root of so many problems in American governance right now, is that Congress is not stepping up, not taking action, not willing to hold the president accountable, except, of course, when it comes to the Epstein files. Be careful what you wish for. All right, let's move on to our final segment here. This is What You Watchin'. This is our cultural recommendations, things we have been reading, watching, playing, otherwise observing in the cultural sphere. Eric, let's start with you. What do you have for us?
Sure. So I read the novel Travel Light by Naomi Mitchison. A little backstory here, actually, before I get into that. A few months ago, I read This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is this absolutely gorgeous little sci-fi novel by Amal El-Matar. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And Max Gladstone. It won all of the awards the year it came out in 2019, all the big sci-fi awards. I got around to it a little late. You've probably read it already if you're listening to this podcast. This is basically the book that the movie Tenet should have been. It's this story about these two agents who are traveling back and forth through time and making little changes and trying to steer the direction of the timeline towards one of two kind of techno and or very non-techno future utopias, sci-fi utopias, and away from their enemy. Anyway, in that book,
techno as in technology, not as in
one of the agents is
a
robot, and the other one is a kind of fairy lady from a very fantasy tinged future sci-fi utopia. But anyway, one of the agents in the book directly in the text of the story recommends to the other one, hey, you should read this book, Travel Light by Naomi Mitchison. And I love when authors and songwriters put little references and things to the stuff that inspired them, but you hardly ever see something that direct, hey, reader, if you want to understand something more about this book, go read that other book. So I did. I went and read the other book, and it is very lovely. Naomi Mitchison, I learned, was a friend and fellow traveler of J.R.R. Tolkien, and there's definitely a little bit of the Hobbit in Travel Light. You can kind of see maybe the cross-pollination of influences there. This is also a story about a main character who goes on a kind of unexpected journey and has a bunch of discoveries. And it's but it's really a little bit more like almost like a modern fairy tale. It starts with Hala, the main character, who is rescued from her evil stepmother. She's a princess, and she's rescued from the evil step queen of this kingdom who's going to kill her by her nursemaid, who happens to be a bear. I mean, she's actually a human, but she can like shapeshift into a bear. And so Hala goes and lives with the bears for a while. And then there's dragons, and Odin and the Valkyries are in this. There's an amazing little bit about dragonish economics, where the dragon that sort of becomes her father explains to her that like dragons hate heroes because the heroes come here and they kill us and they take our gold. And then the worst thing they do is that they give it away to other people who didn't earn it. They just give it away. And it's really great and lovely. And then there's this shift in the middle, and Hala's story kind of crosses the line from like the fairy tales beyond the edge of the map into human society as we would recognize it from like the late Middle Ages. There's like cities, and there's kings, and there's governments, and there's conflict, and there's commerce. Like trade is really important to the second half of this story, which I enjoyed. And anyway, it's great. It's about like the blur where, it's in this world where fairy tales are kind of fading into the background. Myth is becoming more fake and remembered and not quite real. And it's about, maybe it's all about growing up. I don't know. But it's a lovely little short story. Not short story. It's a short novel. Travel light. I recommend.
A novella? A novelette?
I guess it would be a novella. I read it in like in a weekend. So sure.
Yeah. Katherine, I know you liked This How You Lose the Time War.
I did, and Eric's recommendation has made me want to read this book as well, and has made me want to go live with the bears.
Yeah.
I read Our Country Friends, which is a novel by Gary Steingart, and it's a pandemic novel. I would not have picked up a pandemic novel on my own. I'm not yet ready to do that more, but my book club is reading it, and I'm glad that I did. It's like Chekhov does the pandemic. So it's sort of Russian influenced. It's a group of friends who are in upstate New York or something, outside the city. As the pandemic rolls in, there's, it's got the kind of like country house farce element to it, but it's a little bit darker than that. It's a little bit better than that. I've not read any of his other books, but I gathered that this one is heavier. So if you are a fan, maybe appropriately enough, this is the weighed down COVID version. It's also pretty clear that the host of this gathering is our author, who I went and read about his country house in upstate New York that has the same name as the house in the book, as one does. I think that, having been tricked into reading a sort of COVID-era novel that was written and published while COVID was still going on, here at the, 5-6 year mark, we lost our minds. Oh my God, we lost our minds. And this book thinks that it is very self-aware about how much we lost our minds. It's sort of very winking about the social distancing and the weird ways that people interacted with the small number of people they could be physically present with. And yet this book is so dramatically unself-aware of the macro mind losing that occurred in America. It touches on Black Lives Matter. It touches on kind of the way that things are going in the outside world, and on the kind of elite self sequestration. It has a little Mask of the Red Death energy. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that COVID does eventually come for our pandemic pod in this novel, and it ends in a kind of fever dream of COVID-induced hallucination. We lost our minds, and it is worth revisiting that periodically as we get increasing perspective on how much we lost our minds. Our Country Friends by Gary Steingart.
Does Gary Steingart die in the end? Because
I'm not...
if it's autofiction, that would be kind of funny.
Sure.
He's a great writer. Super Said True Love Story is fantastic. But if you just want a short, intense burst of Gary Steingart, Google Gary Steingart New Yorker watches. He wrote the very best feature article about being a watch guy.
Did I read that because you made me read that? Probably.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It's so well executed, and in fact, I think about it probably once a week as somebody who's a failed watch guy.
His self-portrait in this book is extremely unflattering, and I do gather that's a bit of his shtick. But the portrait of himself dressing down a flapping, wallet with moths flying out of it, self-delusionally pretentious artist. It's pretty juicy.
Nick?
I watched Death by Lightning, which is a 4-part series about James Garfield, our 20th president, and one of the shortest lived. I think the Netflix show might be as long as his presidency. It is really tremendous, and it's anchored mostly by Nick Offerman's performance as Chester Alan Arthur, who is typically, our second or third fattest president and one of our least renowned. It's based on a work of history about the death of Garfield. He was assassinated by a nut job named Charles Guiteau, who had spent time at the Oneida colony in New York, the Free Love colony. And it's a great tableau of a period of history that's around the election of 1880 that we really don't visit as much or as often as we should. It's when the coalitions from the Civil War were unraveling, the political factions and rivalries were kicking up. The parties did not represent anything approaching a stable majority. So it's very similar to our current moment. The act of political violence that is at the root of the book is shocking and kind of contemporary in various ways, or at least conjures up contemporary anxieties. And Offerman's Chester Arthur is just a big fat lout who is the manservant of a powerful New York senator who ends up kind of getting on the outs of everything. But it's in some way it's about Arthur's ability to rise beyond his own limitations in order to occupy, at least for a small part of American history, center stage and do a couple of things that are pretty good. So it's really fun and interesting to watch. And also, I am sorry that Matt Welch is not here because he, like me and possibly Eric, have an affinity for mustachioed baseball players of olden times. And there are so many mutton chops. It is just, see it on the biggest TV screen you can get because it is just beard after beard after beard and, just big, chunky mutton chops that are, just an incredible thing to see. And to see it all for whatever Netflix costs a month now. It's really great. But Death by Lightning, it's a weirdly, winkingly dated, relevant, contemporary political story about a world that is very similar to our own.
I was going to ask if he had steak for breakfast too, but I guess when you have mutton chops, you don't need steak,
Yeah, well,
in whatever form.
I think he probably did, and this is also one of just a great thing, in passing. Arthur is when he's not eating or punching people out, he is at whorehouses. So it's it's
Same.
politics as it was, as it is, and as it always will be.
Yeah. The mustache is coming back in baseball. Paul Skeens, American League Cy Young winner this year, Rookie of the Year winner last year. He brought the mustache
and we're
back
done
by
with
himself.
I think we're done with the House of David kind of beard. The ZZ Top era is receding, but a new mustache era is
Cal
upon us,
Raleigh,
and it's beautiful.
Has a mustache. Yeah, it's coming back.
It's coming back not just in baseball, but in hipsterdom, and it all goes back to the movie Her, which got so many things right, the whole airspace aesthetic, right? The AIs that you talk to and or maybe your girlfriend having a mustache just predicted our whole future. Speaking of the future, I watched The Running Man. It is the second film adaptation of the Stephen King, Richard Bachman short story of a dystopian future in which people participate in game shows where they might die, but that's the only way they can make money to feed their families or, in this case, get drugs for their little babies. This is not a good movie. It's unfortunate because I like Edgar Wright, the director. He's did Baby Driver and whole bunch of great stuff. He's got this sort of zany, zippy, satirical, kind of stylistics, and he brings some of that here. But this movie is just relentlessly It's like a Zoran Mamdani campaign commercial, except much less charming. It's so bluntly, brutally socialist at every turn, and it's also 2 hours and 20 minutes long. And there's some clever bits in it. There's some action scenes that are well designed. And Glenn Powell, yes, is charming, but he's also been cast as somebody who fundamentally isn't, he's not allowed to be all that charming in this movie because he is playing the single angriest man to ever play this game. And so all he gets to do is look into a camera and kind of yell angrily and increasingly manically, and he's sort of pitted against this corporate overlord, and you're supposed to understand these big corporations, they're so bad. And what you eventually understand over the course of the movie is the big corporation functionally is the government. All of the complaints this movie has about big corporations are really complaints about authoritarian governments that like restrict your freedom and are terrible and make all your decisions for you. And like that's correct, but this movie doesn't seem to, it's not self-aware enough to know it. And it is really remarkable how much it channels the kind of Bernie Sanders, Zoran Mamdani, everything that is successful and big and sort of capitalist and corporate in the world is out to get you, the working man. I mean, the first scene in this movie is Glenn Powell begging for work from a shop supervisor, but he's been blacklisted because he talked about unions one time. So this whole thing is it's just a bizarre kind of science fiction retrofitting of this sort of democratic socialist leftist politics onto an action movie that I'm not even opposed to that sort of thing and that kind of politics in a movie. I love They Live, which is basically the same idea. But in this case, The Running Man sadly just doesn't work. Wish I could recommend it, but this one wasn't for me.
Do they have the zippy, shitty Arnold one-liners, like at one point in the original Running Man when he kills one of the bad guys in the game by cutting him in half, and somebody says, what happened to that guy? He had to split. Yeah, it's like he lights somebody on fire. It's like, gotta light, that type of... Is there at least homage to that?
The only homage to the original is that the money in this movie, when you see paper money, it has the picture of the president on it, and it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I was like, oh, I do like Arnold Schwarzenegger. All right, folks, that is our show. Reminder, send your webathon questions to podcast@reason.com. Please label them webathon. Also, we have another Reason versus debate next month. It's coming soon, December 10th. Reason's Robbie Suave and Elizabeth Nolan Brown are debating Emily Jashinsky, who's been on this show, and Ryan Grimm from Breaking Points. They're going to be debating Big Tech. The resolution is Big Tech does more good than harm. Robbie and Liz from Reason are going to say that's right. Big Tech does do more good than harm. Emily and Ryan are going to take the other side. That debate is here in Washington, D.C. at the Miracle Theater. For tickets and more information, go to reason.com/versus. That's reason.com/versus. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. Thank you so much for listening and going to all of these websites that I have to say every single week. The Reason Roundtable will return.